Okay, to remind everybody, I'll just remind you of what we've talked about. Information, communication, and new media studies, and with all that entails. What is the field? What do we mean by this field? And where is it going? What kinds of issues and what kinds of institutional aspects are characterizing this field now? We started out with a session on good for what, and by looking at some of the multiple constituencies, multiple stakeholders that we're now trying to be responsive to, including funding agencies and foundations and activist groups, government, civil society, and business and industry. I mean, I think it seems like we're in an era where peer review is only one aspect, although peer review keeps raising its head in terms of assessment exercises, et cetera. Then we started talking about, we followed that with visions of the future of the field. And obviously there are multiple visions of the future of the field, and some people arguing that it's not a field at all. But then we looked at initiatives, both within academia, but also within funding agencies and civil society that might be shaping what we're calling a new institutional ecology. I think we began talking about the institutional ecology as different departments, units within academia, but it quickly became an institutional ecology involving national governments and regional agencies and much broader than academia. We then focused explicitly on the international and regional divides that characterize the field, so that instead of just simply looking at disciplinary fragmentation, we focused a bit of attention on how there were certainly geographical divides and parochialism still within a globally networked sector. And then we turned to technology and whether technology is shaping at all or transforming the way this field works and the way the field envisions itself. Some people were arguing that technology was totally transforming the way this field works. Others saying that it was simply reinforcing old divides and divisions and not really a transformative function at all, which is very characteristic of the debate in the literature generally. So we thought, and then we looked at, well, where do we go from here in this last session on next steps? But what we wanted to do is make sure that we had an opportunity for people that might not have had an opportunity to make a point to, or that we have a diversity of viewpoints on exactly what to make of the 2 days that we've been discussing this, is to have everyone make 1 or 2 points, maybe perhaps 1 or 2 bullet points about what they're taking away from this discussion. And it could be a criticism, it could be a point of summary, it could be a new observation that they want to go beyond what we've spoken about. But I think that way we'll sure to get on the table what everybody feels is absolutely critical to gain from this. And hopefully the major difficulty is try not to repeat what others have said, but you can certainly chime in with agreement. But let's try to raise some new points and but also totally remind us of things that you thought were insightful that might have come to mind through the last 2 days. Okay, Thierry, could we move around the room? Okay.
So, in a way,
and maybe I'm Bill Dutton, but it'd be useful for you to introduce yourselves as we move through the.
Okay, so my name is Thierry Medel. So I come from France, as you can hear, and I'm based in the Center for Political Research, where I do research on, let's say, electronic democracy and also political communication, especially the use of new tools and ICTs in political communication. So, wow, this meeting has been really excellent and very fruitful, and I really like the mix of people from different disciplines, and also something we really like, at least in France, it's more communication between academics and activists. So we don't use as much this term of activist in French. Okay, but I like very much this idea of communicating, exchanging with activists. Sorry. Okay, so to be very brief, maybe there is a point where I would have expected us to have more debate, but of course it's something which is more European. It's the role of the European Union in fostering, developing multidisciplinary research. Okay, because I'm not sure that the European Union is following the right strategy and the right method, I would say. Okay, and we have now a bureaucracy which is amazing in the European Union regarding research.
Helen, do you want to hold until to be responded?
Okay.
Okay. Helen, we've asked Helen Margetts at the OII because she wasn't able to be here the first 2 days to come
Summarize it.
to respond from a fresh, sort of not having heard what
Unbiased.
Christian Sandvik.
Yeah, Christian Sandvik. I guess one thing that I came away from this meeting is with more of a realization that the relationship between academic research and any effect outside of the academy is much more problematic than I thought, and I already thought that it was problematic. But I came out with some hope, and that's that it seems to me that there are a number of levels that we've identified at which academic research does have some effect. And I think a lot of the focus of this meeting has been on a level of tying academic research and data to specific policy debates and needs. But the more we've talked about that, the more I've also been thinking that clearly this is a project, clearly academic projects can relate to broader effects in the world via a number of mechanisms, and clearly some of them do not involve tying to particular policy debates. And so as someone who wants to have some effect, some idealistic young academic who wants to have an effect on policy, the world, life, I've definitely come away with this, interestingly I think for me, not with a sense that the right thing to do is to tie my own work more closely to specific policy debates. I mean, I think that was in part a goal of this. I'm not sure that it's something that I've come away with as a lesson personally. So, okay, a note of ambiguity, and I'll stop.
Ralph?
Yeah, Ralph Schroeder, OII, research fellow, and I was in the panel on how technology is kind of reshaping the field, but I think the points that stand out for me most in this workshop was the session on the internationalization. And I wanted to grab the points that Randy Clover made and that also Gloria made. I mean, it's the extent to which just the way in which media uses and the kind of expertise that those two and others in the field have in this area about how new media are being used for political and other purposes in that arena. It's really redefining the field, and that we as kind of new media scholars haven't taken that on board as much as we should. And I mean that in the sense of both opening up new topics. I mean, we tend to see the debate in Asia as being about censorship and democracy and so on, and obviously those are important issues. But I think also to shift away from that and to notice that there's so much more going on there, that there's such a rich field of study there that's probably going to kind of shift our focus away just from those kinds of issues and actually look at much more how people are using channels to kind of reconfigure the public sphere to use channels in ways that we perhaps in the UK and US dominated media studies arena don't recognize. So I take that away as being some of the strongest new impressions that I've got from this workshop.
Yeah, my name's Jeffrey Becker from the Centre for Science, Technology and Society at Santa Clara University. I guess two things that I've been thinking about, among many, it's been a very rich occasion. One is what constitutes research and what constitutes theory has come away as a really strong takeaway for me. Both in terms of, is building a technology, is building a system part of research, is working with activists, is the work that activists do itself a form of research? And I think, muddying the waters there is actually something that's very valuable to do. Sort of a spin-off from that and quite specific. I've been to several of these kinds of workshops, and we always come down to incentive structures in universities from the academic side, that incentive structures seem to be severely broken at the university level, and we always say it, and nothing ever seems to happen as a result. And so one of the things that I've decided is that I want to look for ways in which we can really start to influence the incentive structures in universities much more directly. And I think the SSRC project is a possible lead-in for that.
Very good, thanks.
I'm Cesar Millan, the Center for the Study of the Information Society, University of Haifa. Want to express gratitude for having been invited. This was a great conference. I think one sentence about absence. This is one of the first academic conferences I've been to where neither theory nor methodology were really heavily discussed. And that's not necessarily a criticism. I think that the opportunity to focus on the boundary between academics and activism is just as important. And I'm grateful for having had these 2 or 3 days to think about this issue, especially in the context of what I think in many cultures is coined in the idiom, the cobbler should not let their children, his children, her children, walk barefoot. And the question is, does internet research focus on internet as a tool, as a methodology, as a theory, as a method to do information transfer to stakeholders that might make use of it? I'd like to join Jeffrey in this interest in incentive structures. Incentive structures are important and enigmatic in academia. I think they're important and enigmatic in information and knowledge generally, not just academia. And in fact, that's one general umbrella question for internet research. If the internet is a medium for information generation and sharing, then what are the structures to incentivize contribution, to rate and rank the quality and relevance of contribution, sift through the overload of contribution? That would be an opportunity, and the context of sharing academic research with activists is just one socially valued context for doing so, and I think that was, for me, a takeaway.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Zittrain from OII. Hello, Cleveland. So, 2 takes away, as we say, attorneys general. Number 1, the puzzle of how to work a multidisciplinary field while almost all of us are trained or based in one discipline. I think the sum of all fields is no solution. It's just hard to become a professor in 8 subjects and to master everything. It's going to have to be some kind of federated model where we have an opportunity to graze in our own zone, but also easily work within and know people and exchange ideas with others. So a couple takes away from that is that we have the opportunity to have some new research tools grounded in these new technologies, something like the distributed application I was talking about to gather data from individual internet users, but by no means exclusively that, and facilitating access to that data that might be generated by everyone, and to facilitate access to people who might know how to crunch data very well. I mean, not all of us are trained in statistics and regressions and such, and to be able to pair up people who know how to do good empirical work with people who are off doing things that are above the treetops might be very useful. I could see some opportunity to have a portal of some kind where, as we have working hypotheses, the bases for important papers that we're doing, we have a chance basically to post them, not with a research bounty necessarily attached to it, but just to say this is what we're up to, and to have some way, even knowing how busy we all are, to actually be able to spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes critiquing, offering suggestions, offering ideas, even offering some readings that might be useful, I think, at least for my own work, it would be immensely helpful to steal 5 minutes of each of your time asynchronously as I'm starting a new project and see what you might have to suggest, and maybe vice versa. I heard a lot about peer review and the future of the journal, and given that the work we do may start to take forms other than academic journal articles, the question collectively for us is what we might be able to do to encourage, index, and preserve credible forms of alternative expression to journal articles that'll make it worthwhile for academics who operate according to very well-known Skinner-esque principles to be able to devote energy to those forms of expression. And there might be something we can collectively do to validate certain additional forms of expression that we couldn't do alone. The second takeaway to me is just grazing a little more on the opportunities that might exist among our students and for teaching, not just thinking of research standing alone. The bounties idea is very appealing to me, and I think with the right work can really take off. I would like to think that we could do a virtual seminar that's a very real seminar in multiple places that actually connects with counterpart seminars driven by our respective students, so that we actually have a group of 15 to 30 people studying at institutions around the world who find it useful to devote an hour or two a week, sometimes synchronously, sometimes not. Maybe somebody has to be up awake in the middle of the night, depending on where you are in Singapore or here, but to actually having some of the conflicts that we might be having at one level, let them experience the conflicts as they are training, as they're working on their papers, and they may be more willing to cross boundaries before they've yet been fully trained in exactly where those boundaries lie. And a clinical component to that seminar where the people in it are hooked up with real people in the real world who have real problems for which they're turning to academics for good ideas or for solid data. I think that would make that seminar something a lot of students would want to take and be eager to take, and that could further knit our work together.
Thank you. I'm Christine Boardman, Information Studies, UCLA, and I have degrees in 3 different fields: mathematics, library and information science, and a PhD in communication, and then I get most of my funding from computer science, which is a 4th field. So I'm either very interdisciplinary or very confused. We didn't talk about training as much as was on the agenda, but I think it's another one to consider. It's not easy to get degrees in different in completely different fields, but to do this kind of work, it's extremely valuable. It's much easier to read the literature if you've got that. So one takeaway is I hope we'll consider in our own programs trying to get people with degrees in other fields into them rather than taking people straight through one field. I think that would help. The other takeaway is from my own work, whether we like it or not, there's these huge initiatives underway to build cyber infrastructure, e-science, e-social science, and they're very much about disciplines and research, to a lesser extent about learning. I realize from these discussions there's virtually nothing in those about knowledge transfer or technology transfer to other disciplines. And this is a rare moment to influence, to shape those technologies. So it's a good time to have these discussions. But let's take the opportunity for shaping. This is the time for it.
Randy Clover, Singapore Internet Research Center. I think that much of the discussion about sharing, about breaking boundaries, so on, even talk of portals and so on, presumes a certain amount of finished product. That once we've done our research, here's some ways to share it, here's some ways to link it with activists, link it with other people. Our interest in our region is really a little bit different. We've been spending quite a bit of time trying to actually build research capacity in the region. For a variety of historical and primarily economic reasons, much of Asia in particular, as well as other parts of the world, just don't have the funding nor the mechanisms in place, the institutions in place to generate the kind of research that can then enter the global conversation. And as you know from my conversation yesterday, I very much believe that much of the agenda of the emerging field, or whatever it is still being driven by Western concerns. So I think where we are is asking that question: how can we build research capacity so that we can get to a final product? Because now when we work with our colleagues in Thailand or Sri Lanka or Indonesia, they have very little that we can then present to the global community of scholars. And that's really where we're at, is thinking about what are funding mechanisms we need to find, or what are infrastructures that we need to set up, so that we can take people in situ, people in a situation that they can't come out, perhaps to complete a PhD at a place like Oxford or something like that, and give them the research capacity so that they can then enter the global conversation and begin to be a part of that.
Jonathan Aronson, Annenberg Center for Communication. Let me take a slightly different take on some of this, but parallel. 3 points. One, I think it's very important that we pick and focus on hard and important problems. That there's a very real danger of getting too much in, because everybody has their own self-interested issues that they're curious about. And I think that there needs to be some collaboration across disciplines, across centers, across departments, saying what are the real key issues. Second, one of the things that I took away from this is that the academics tend to see themselves as supplying information, research for the activists. I think, in fact, that the academics have more to learn from the activists than supplying them. What the activists do much better than the academics is get the word out. Their whole mission is how do we make change, and I think academics have much to learn. That too many academics have this habit of finishing a research project and then going on to the next one, where you should be spending at least 30 to 40% of your time after you publish it to make sure it gets to the people that you want. And I know very, very few academics who do it well. And that there needs to be almost some institutional help from the activists and from the foundations to say it's not good research unless it gets out there. It may or may not find a place. Third point, and just a note. We've been very good about the activist academic, about some regional diversification. There need to be a few more technologists at the table because they have an important role to play.
Nina Wakeford, Insight at the University of Surrey. I think this follows quite nicely on from Jonathan's comment. One of the things I started realising, especially this morning, where I think the conversation shifted a bit from where it was yesterday, was how little perhaps this field, whatever it is, knows about contemporary social movements and how activists actually work. And it seems to me that that opened up as a big chasm for me in the kind of knowledge at the table, where activists clearly are doing contemporary social movements, a lot of them, whatever activists are, as Sean said, but much of the field of new media studies hasn't really concentrated on social movements, apart from, say, studies of how email discussion lists somehow help social movements, and that kind of study. That would be my first point. Maybe that's some bridge or knowledge gap or something that we have to think about. The second thing maybe follows on, and this is where it gets hard, you start repeating yourself or moving on other people's comments, but Jeff's comments about do activists do research made me think about maybe something to push forward on different kinds of research methodologies, which was a point that I raised in the session at the end of yesterday. And I was thinking about, can we actually think about research methodologies such as things like citizens' juries, which are things that have been used widely in all kinds of contexts for generating knowledge, that actually actively involve people in generating knowledge through this model of the jury system, which you'd say is only one kind of way of knowing, but yet it's really far from something that ESRC would fund as academic research, I think. And the last thing, I suppose, is building on a comment that was just at the end of Jeff's paper, but also that Ravi raised. which was about the constituencies that tend to get missed out because in a disciplinary mix they're seen as maybe not as relevant, and that is people from art and film. And I think you said very much that your organisation had the experience of bringing artists and filmmakers as activists, really. And Jeff, I think you made the comment in your paper that artists were part of the kind of bridging constituency of doing this knowledge transfer. So I think maybe new media art practices may be seen as, in a more rigorous way, as places where data is generated, and we maybe need to pay a bit more attention to them.
Oh, hello, I'm Judy Wiseman. I'm at the OAI and at the Australian National University, and it's not great being this late in the queue because some of the things I'm afraid I will repeat, but one thing that does strike me just from what I've been listening to, and this kind of echoes what's just been said, and maybe it is because I've been in science and technology studies and feminist studies for decades, is it does seem to me I haven't at all identified really with the discussion about the kind of gaps between academic work and activism. I feel like we've had discussions in STS about public understanding of science, citizens' juries, deliberative democracy, various models for how to engage citizens. You know, the Blair government has run various forums to engage citizens. I mean, it seems to me there's a huge amount of experience that we can kind of draw on to have that conversation, and somehow it hasn't been part of this conversation. And that's a shame, and partly echoes my opening remarks about how I do think there are some lessons to be learnt from science and technology studies over the years. My second comment, I'm afraid, is shared with Ralph, and we chatted about it last night, which was that I thought the international dimension was absolutely terrific. I have to say that it did make, it gave me a real jolt and made me realise how kind of Anglo-Eurocentric even my own, and I think I'm pretty broad, being Australian as well, that the way I sort of think about the internet, see the questions, the China issues really did open my eyes to kind of really how parochial kind of my views are of these things. So I think it's terrific having international meetings for that reason. I don't know that Australians quite count as having a completely unique perspective, but anyway, and I guess the third thing I felt, which is the kind of very positive thing, is that I had the good fortune or misfortune of opening the session with my comments on whether internet studies is a field or not, and I very much said I didn't think it was a field. I thought I went for the model of a multidisciplinary network, but I am very struck by the fact that it's a very interdisciplinary group and a very diverse group, and yet we've managed to have a shared conversation perfectly happily and well, and socially in a very positive and good way. And
this is the heroism.
Sorry?
The heroism.
No, not at all. No, not at all. I think with absolute ease and with an absolute kind of common language, and across various of divides like new media, STS, information sciences, whatever. So I think that's a very positive thing, and I'm very pleased to have been here and hope it will continue.
My name is Gloria. I'm working for Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. My background is philosophy. 10 years ago, when I teach Chinese philosophy here in Oxford, I got my first experience on the internet, and I believe this is very powerful. Since then, I think this will change China. So I became a kind of technical determinist. Can I say that? Risky. I keep on saying this technology will change China. I keep on saying if someone asks me use one word to explain what's the internet, I would say openness. And I think this openness will open technology will change China. And I very much prefer the first press conference in Washington by Jeff Koh. He released his survey results in Washington. And the senior vice president of AOL gave a presentation. I still remember one of his words that said that this is power of technology. Now, one more thing. the social change is not just because of technology, and technology made because of human being, and it's man-made technology. It's not technology make man. And I was amazed yesterday at dinner. I sit by Ted Nelson.
Yes.
Yeah, I explained my research and how I define openness and how I thought this open technology can change China. He said, "Don't say technology, don't say technology. It's not technology. We made technology." You know, when I tried to invent World Wide Web, there's several choices. So, I choose which thing is man-made. It's not just technology. And as I gave presentation yesterday, I also thought it's very difficult to say the social change or whatever. It's just made by technology. This is one thing. Another thing is when Jeff Cole started with World Internet Project, I was very excited to think this international comparison. I think is very important. But now I more and more feel it's very, very difficult, if I won't say impossible, to it's okay or to have some descriptive study like I want to know what happened in China, in India, in Brazil, or in Chile. I've got lots of information that's very good. But if we want to get some general principle, universal principle, or universal language, I think it's very difficult. I would like to do some research, more like a so-called localized research instead of globalized research. Thank you.
I'm Malcolm Pelter. I'm editorial consultant for the OII. My 2 points. One, if I'm not saying I'm a technology determinist, but I hope I can say something in favour of single disciplinary research and also on the values of the academic model, which was often criticised. And I think and it builds on the point that technology is man-made. The values built into the internet are those of the academic world. If it wasn't driven by open information that's driven by knowledge seeking, not profitability, there wouldn't be an internet. So I think in criticising the academic model, recognise the value, and also without the technologists who built the internet, a lot from academia, there wouldn't be an internet. And another example from another field is environmental activism, which is based on the hard science through peer-reviewed journals and all the things that have been criticised. So I'm not arguing against, and I fully agree with all the discussion on multidisciplinary, but I think there's a danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The other point, it relates for over 40 years, I've been in one way or other trying to communicate from one set of experts to other groups. And I think it's much more complex than is sometimes made to seem, and particularly the issue of looking for a common language. My personal view, there isn't one, and the danger is of when you try and find a common language, you lose the nuance and the richness and that is within the language that people are using in their own disciplines or their own cultures. And I just feel there should be more searching for listening to what other people are saying and what they're saying in their language and context. And I think I agree that in that way you can communicate with each other, but don't look for an oversimplified common language, because you can lose a lot of the richness.
No, I'm Sergio Godoy from the School of Communications of the Catholic University of Chile. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me here. And thanks for bringing the I would say, Spanish-speaking world and Latin world into this discussion, because I feel that it's quite away from, I would say, the focus of attention both of academia, activists, and corporations. We are not as poor as Africa, as I said in previous days, and we are not as prosperous as Asians, nor threatening as well. So we're in a sort of gray zone, which is absolutely out of the interest of the big academic circles. And that's a first point I would like to make. I realize that when I go back, I'll really need to go through that and try to build and do some, I would say, specialized networking with my colleagues from other Latin countries, and Spain, Portugal, whatever. And I have two other observations. First of all, concerning this multidiscipline and international comparisons as well, I feel an ambiguous thing here, because both alternatives of doing multidiscipline research and international efforts, you are basically arriving to one single scale to evaluate the field or the object or phenomenon that you would like to analyze, and that's dangerous sometimes. I would like really to recover what you said, together with multidiscipline and the need to do some cross-national comparisons, there's also the need to stay and preserve some specialized views. Because, for instance, I participate in two comparative multidiscipline projects. One is too rigid, according to my feeling, but it's easier to manage. We have a sort of template, a theoretical framework. That's the Business and Information Technology project, which is business-oriented. It's easier to go through with it, but it's a sort of has a single point of view of looking at the impact of IT on the economic life of countries. The other project in which I'm involved, the World Internet Project, is much more chaotic, but it allows all the countries who participate, such as China, Chile, and Britain throughout the OII, to have a wider and more flexible view of what is going on in everyday life. So I'm not completely convinced that we need to, for the sake of taking this fashionable term of multidiscipline, to forget the need to stay also together with more specialized views. And the last point I would like to make is about the role of academia. We have been speaking about the role of activists, government, also corporations in a lower degree. But I think academics, we need to not only consider theories and methodologies, as Cesar Raffaelli said before. Really, we need to look at the need to disseminate our knowledge further and really take an active role on building bridges. That's the role that my school is taking now in these projects I mentioned. And also I would like to use the word ethic. We have a special ethics. Academics, we have a special way of presenting results, of placing ourselves. I think from all the constituencies we mentioned, we are the only ones who are clearly, we would like to be as open as possible about our premises or our fundamentals when we present data. Corporations, governments, activists, they all have their own agendas. And if they want to negotiate in the so-called real world, they really have to hide below the sleeve some cards. We academics have the, advantage or disadvantage to explain beforehand what we are standing for. And I think that we must preserve that and also formulate the big questions at the end of the day. Why? I mean, if you are promoting this thing for and taking pictures, why this? And why? And why? I think all the other constituencies really do not stop at the final why. We are the only ones possibly able to go further.
Okay, thanks.
Just to reflect on this morning's session, I think the idea of using some of the new e-marketplace tools, the tools of the profession we're trying to study to begin with, like preference clustering and so on, to network the field is a really noble experiment. And I think it's a great test of sort of activist potential, the activist used loosely for the time being, whether the lessons from the research on what makes e-marketplaces work can be applied in this context. And second is a note of optimism. I think, you know, one of the things I took away was this lesson that Bill raised of we didn't know what internet governments meant, but it turned out the real problem at first was we didn't even know what internet meant. So we've had this workshop, we don't know what the field is, but we also don't know what activists are, and that's a key thing here. But let me just throw out the idea that activist is a proxy for research that is applicable or useful or somehow operational, can be operationalized. And then in that sense, I'd like to inject a note of optimism and say that the needs of activists and the incentive structures for academics don't always have to be in conflict, in the sense that being forced to articulate the so what of a research activity makes both for better quality research and research that's more readily useful for activists.
I'm Craig Calhoun from the Social Science Research Council, and I have lots of takeaways, some of which have been stated by others around the table, so let me concentrate on a few. Thinking of our particular project that we outlined this morning, I think my takeaway is that the scale of the problems, but also the potential opportunities, vastly exceeds our project and our resources. But nonetheless, we can start. And as we start, we have a variety of priorities, but we also hope to be a catalyst to encourage many different initiatives to meet some pretty pressing needs. And these start with the need for serious research that in some ways escapes from those academic structures that contain and limit more than they enable. And I say this not as an anti-academic comment, but rather with an eye to the extent to which universities and research communities, I think, need to change in order to thrive, in which there is a very considerable set of external threats, but there also are huge resources and capacities that are organized mostly within academic organizations and communities, and that need to be reorganized in order to not only meet the threats to them from various sources, but in order to be really useful fully in the world and to thrive that. Mere defense isn't feasible. With that in mind, I think we talked about several specific issues of that kind that really matter a lot for and are exemplified by the agenda in the field of new media. One of those is figuring out how to get more problem-oriented research on the agenda, and how to do that in ways that are often multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, therefore difficult, as many people have said, in ways that are also serious about academic quality and rigor, and maintain some of the virtues of academic research at the same time that they connect to practical problems, practical actors, and so forth, and that are arenas of collaboration. I think that one of the things that comes out of this is the need for collaboration, certainly within and across disciplines, but in a whole variety of ways, very locally, at long distance, among researchers and among users of research, and not just in conducting the research, but in organizing the representation and availability and communication of the research. The issue of communication is not just our topic in new media studies. I think that new media studies just push us to see really clearly the obligation to communicate, and not just amongst ourselves in narrow specialties. And I think that we, including around the table, but we less perhaps than some other communities, tend to overvalue the incremental production of new knowledge. And so one of my takeaways here is to think about the huge challenges of making sure that there is an effective archiving and access system for the knowledge that gets produced, and that there are effective communication strategies that bring academic work to a variety of non-academic constituencies. And that can happen through electronic communication, it can happen through face-to-face communication, it can happen through collaboration and partnerships. There are a lot of structures and issues here But there is a real need not to be passive and assume that if we are creating new knowledge, that's the end of the story, rather than effectively getting it out. I also take away the sense that we had a lot of different perspectives here, and yet we, in some ways, still underrepresent the international dimension of the set of challenges that go to this. We have had really good international voices, but there is a need for a lot more. The activist voices, less represented in fact in this particular session because we've just lost two crucial voices here, but the range of work, and I think it relates to the issue of academic research, not only because of consumers, but because a very large number of our PhDs are actually not working in university settings. When we talk about activists and advocates and applied researchers, we're talking about people who have very similar training to our own. We're talking about many of our most talented students who end up working outside universities and are not simply to be the recipients of watered-down messages, but can be full collaborators in the production and circulation of knowledge. And I think that's really crucial, and it goes for people in engineering and design, as well as in the social sciences.
My name is Joker Ganis. I'm at the Social Science Research Council. I feel like I've had the opportunity to say most of the things I wanted to say on these subjects, so I'll just allude to, well, I've just been very pleased in the course of this couple days to hear about some of the projects going on in other institutions, and I just want to invite you, and in fact beg you, to creatively engage us if you see opportunities to do so. And our project has already been through a couple rounds of definition, and we'll be implementing some of the pieces as described, but there's also a wide margin for additional projects, additional practices, and we'll really be very opportunistic in building those kinds of connections. So whether it's the Annenberg Fellowships that Jonathan described, or the OII Fellows and Institutes, or what has been a kind of long-running, but over the years, not very thick collaboration with Sarai. If we can find ways of making that happen in a more robust way that involves exchange of people, I mean, I see lots of possibilities, and hope that you'll be willing to talk to us down the road about how we can take advantage of some of them. I'm glad to have been pointed toward the history of the telephone, which I'll put on my reading list. I hope it's a smaller book. The last history of the telephone that I had was a tall, narrow thing that I couldn't output on my alphabetical shelves.
That was the purpose.
Yeah. And I just want to thank you all for coming. It's been a real pleasure for me, I think, for Craig, and enormous value to our work.
I am Cesar Millan. I am professor in the Sergipe University in Brazil, and in this moment I am the president of Latin Union of Political Economy, of Communication, Information and Culture. We have a Latin American group very focused in political, academical fight, and aim to developing critical thought in the communication field, but with a very multidisciplinary approach. The idea is to construct a realistic paradigm to aid people to change the world. It's not simply professional interest, but we think it's very, very fundamental that academic knowledge articulates people that are in the fighting for changing the world. So for us, it's very important this kind of articulation with more activist people. We do this, for example, in Brazil, but in this moment for us it's very important to do it in the global arena. And we are trying to approximate with Anglo-Saxon people, and this kind of network for us is very, very important, because it's a very ambitious and interesting project of effective collaboration, and it's very important for us to have direct contact with other people in developing country too. Ask India, China, etc. So it's my first time in this group, and it's very good for me. I expect to continue, and thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm Ravi Sundaram from Sarai in Delhi. There's been so much said, so I'll confine myself to very brief. I think the purpose of this meeting was on target. That is, basically looking at the challenge for public knowledge after the coming of the internet, which is the biggest challenge, since the print era, and which poses a challenge not just to academics but also to activists and to the whole idea of rendering and engaging with things public. Having said that, I think I would like to touch on an aporia, which is clear to me at least. I think we've come up with productive networking, productive strategies for doing research, and different possibilities. I think we've done that quite well, and I think the last session brought a lot of that together. I think the problem still remains about this whole idea of interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinary. We've taken that gloss from the debates of the 70s and the 80s. It's a huge debate. We have not had that debate, period. There's been no debate. There have been little pieces. I think what the SSRC could do, because Ford is not going to fund that, is collate some of the interesting pieces so that people could reflect on what does it mean. Does it mean product research? Does it mean getting people from different disciplines? What is the conceptual basis of thinking about what cross-disciplinary means? I don't think we have that yet. And it would be quite useful to bring together existing collections, because that is done in academic, peer-reviewed. It's a different process. That can't be done here. We could just collate it and actually have people think about what it means. So these are the two kind of things. I think the overall target of the meeting is very productive, because it's a huge challenge, and it's moving towards recognizing that challenge.
Right. Well, Bill Dutton, and very briefly, I had some misgivings about bringing this together to talk about a field, because, I think most of us don't worry that much about it. And it was clear that people are not worried about whether we're a field or not. But I think it's very useful for us to ask what we lack or where we are strong as a field and where we might be going. And it really illustrated the ecology of actors, I would say, not the institutional ecology, but the ecology of actors, because there's many people. Not everyone does everything, and not everyone has to do everything. And if some people do what they do well, and if we network those people, we can have a really vital field. And I think my biggest worry is this issue of we're in a multi-stakeholder, multi-constituency environment now, and my concern is, will that undermine quality research in terms of what the OII is trying to bring to the table? And my sense is that it probably won't. And it's actually that I think this multi-constituency sort of, the pressures we're facing are actually pushing us towards more international research, which is going to be less parochial, and more multidisciplinary research, which will also be less parochial and much more critical so it's pushing us away from only disciplinary research and only local oriented research. So I think it's good news for the quality of research, and will ensure that projects are anchored in more international, more multidisciplinary settings, and that we're more, and it's also pushing to networking the field, because i.e. the work of the SSRC and others. And so I think maybe good news, But Helen.
Okay, well, I'm Helen Margetts, a professor here at the OII, and I'm very sorry that I wasn't here before, and therefore what I say may be annoying, because you've said it already. But really, I just, from what everyone said this morning and going around the table just now, it seemed to me that what the conversation is focused on is kind of boundary crossing 4 sorts of boundaries: international boundaries, the boundaries between different academic disciplines, the boundaries between academics and activists, and the boundaries between kind of policy, problem-oriented research and academic research. And what's been quite interesting is different people have had different perspectives on what the focus has been on. I've heard some people say, of course, we're moving away now from this particular boundary, like activists versus academics, and we should be focusing on that. And other people seem to have been thinking that the whole thing was about focusing on international boundaries. So it's very clear that the boundaries are very important, and they're important. Different boundaries are more important to different people. I imagine what hasn't come out just now, I guess, is but I imagine that what you've been talking about is kind of the specific. These boundaries are two-way. They're two-way. They're asymmetrical. And somebody mentioned, for example, I mean that, you know, we're used to the idea that I suppose that activists are supposed to be learning from academics. Well, academics have things to learn from activists, particularly in the social sciences, because after all, I mean, I'm a social scientist, but I mean, let's face it, the frontiers of the social science knowledge are not as far away as they are in the sciences. I mean, we must accept that. So, I mean, activist research can be, you know, on a par with academic research, and there can be a lot to learn. It's important to recognise that. I think also that something that came out from things different people said is that these boundaries are sort of different. They're cross-cutting. They're different in different countries, for example. So activists, you know, some people have a perception of activists, you know, coming from the same background as academics with PhDs in 3 subjects. And other people might have views of activists being deeply sort of problematic partners in any kind of research endeavour. And I think what that suggests is that it's very, very difficult to generalise. Specific sort of boundary crossing will evoke particular problems, and I've really noticed that in my own project that I'm doing at the moment between computer science, economics and political science. That very specific, pragmatic things come up which you wouldn't think that matter, but they really, really matter. You know, just things like a theoretical economist will say, oh, well, we can't possibly publish anything on that for 3 years because, you know, we've got to work it up properly, and I don't believe in giving papers at conferences, and therefore we can't publish anything from it. And the computer scientist is saying, well, hang on a minute, you know, the vice president of Yahoo is really interested in this. He wants something to quote, and I'm not allowed to show. No, you're not allowed. I mean, those things, they're pragmatic, but they're actually really important, and this kind of research can sort of falter on those kind of issues. So I do think that there's quite pragmatic, specific issues. It's very difficult to generalise about some of these issues. In terms of crossing these boundaries, I think 3 things have come up as far as I can work out. One of them, obviously, is money. One of them is love. I mean, sort of cosy, sort of networking type things. And the third is technology. Although I have a feeling that the focus has been less on technology than it has been on money and love. Perhaps, as I think you pointed out, there's not very many technologists here, or perhaps it's because, as Ted Nelson points out, it's not really a technology. The internet's not a technology. Now, when it comes to the sort of balance between money and love, obviously they're both important. I mean, I'm inclined to think that money remains. I mean, I think you sort of, to some extent, you can buy love, but
you can certainly love money.
Love gets on very badly without any money. You know, it's much more likely to founder with no money. So I would be inclined to take away Sharon's comment about not being able to buy Model 1 for the price of Model 2. I mean, I don't think you can get away from that. You can't forget that. But I guess to end on a note of Phil's optimism, I mean, one thing we really should remember is that social science is really, really cheap. I mean, we're used to that problem, those of us who are social scientists in multi-faculty universities. Social science is so cheap compared with science. So if the environmental field can kind of do it, can kind of cross the boundaries in the ways that people have been discussing in a sort of what's predominantly a hard science area, we really ought to be able to manage it.
Okay. Well, let me thank everybody for coming, and it was a great seminar. I really appreciate SSRC, Ford Foundation, the ESRC for supporting this, and I hope all of you have a safe trip home and everything else. Okay, so applaud to everybody.